talked about here in almost every angle I can think of. I was trying, as I'm sitting up here, thinking about like which direction I really want to talk about, like how domestic violence ties into all of this, but I mean, there's not like any way that it doesn't, and that I can think of at this time anyway. Domestic violence is trauma. And a lot of what we've talked about can stem from trauma response and long-term trauma response. And domestic violence is another thing that unfortunately is impacting all of us in some capacity. 1 in 4 women in their lifetime will personally experience domestic violence. And I want to be clear, when I talk about domestic violence, I'm not even talking about like a singular trauma or a singular assault. Domestic violence is a pattern of behaviors and events that's taking place. That is occurring with at least 1 in 4 women in our society in their lifetime. And if that hasn't happened to you, it has definitely happened to people that you know. And it's happening to many of us, women, across the board. It also happens really frequently with men. We don't talk about that quite as much, but 1 in 7 men experience abuse in their lifetime. It's a pretty staggering number. And with so many people walking around carrying sort of the weight of this trauma and these life experiences, absolutely it's impacting people's mental well-being and health. And that's something that we need to talk about. And talking about it from sort of every angle, especially, I had a very brief exchange with somebody right before we came up here. And I was thinking about like ways in which this really impacts people of color. And it impacts women of color in particular in ways that I think are super significant. We talk about, first and foremost, historical trauma and like what that does for anybody of color and what that means, and the fact that we've created a society where people do walk around, like you mentioned, with a smile on their face because you feel like that's the right thing to do, that's the thing, and it is a shield and a way to not sort of expose yourself. And we've put people in that corner, we've put people in that position where we feel like that's what you have to do. And it's created a lot of roadblocks to having conversations that can potentially help people. I think also when we talk about domestic violence, I would be remiss if I didn't say that right now, when I am out in the community talking to people, and I ask what we think our resources are for domestic violence, people talk about law enforcement, and that's sort of like the start and finish. And I think we know that's not going to be the obvious go-to for everyone. And so we need to talk more about additional resources, wraparound resources in our community. The YWCA is one of those here, but we actually have a lot of support for this in Middle Tennessee. And of the programs that I'm aware of, including the YWCA, but not limited to, we want it to be sort of a holistic conversation and or program depending on what the needs of someone are. I want to talk to someone about their mental and emotional well-being, which of course is not going to be at an ideal state when I'm talking to them because they've likely experienced domestic violence personally. If not, it's someone very close to them. Those are sort of the two facets in which I'm coming into contact with people. But this is affecting so many people. I also am thinking about, as you talk about suicide and what a massive issue that is, lethality in general. Tennessee, when we talk about domestic violence, is not doing particularly well. Tennessee right now is 5th in the nation for the rate at which women are killed in domestic violence situations. That feels pretty, entrapping, if you will. I think to feel not only affected by the trauma and let that have sort of the effect and toll that it takes on your mental and emotional health, but then to feel like there may not be a realistic way out, or that it could end in death either way, that's impactful. There's also this other angle that is uncomfortable to talk about, but we hear all the time on the news about murder-suicides. Those are domestic violence murders, almost every single time. And so suicidal ideation plays a role for survivors and those that are being abused, but also abusers. So again, another sort of piece of this conversation that we probably need to delve a little deeper into as a community.